Welcome to this webinar on the opportunities for local authority fleets and the potential for transport decarbonisation using biomethane. We're part of Decarbonising Transport Week. This is being organised by ADBA, the Anaerobic Digestion and Bioresources Association. My name's Chris Huhn, I'm the chair. I should perhaps give you a few housekeeping points. The housekeeping rules to ensure the smooth running of the event. Select the speaker view at the top right-hand corner of your screen to get the best view of the presentations as they come through. Please use the Q&A section to ask any questions, and they'll be reviewed and addressed in the final section of the webinar. Please use only the chat room for admin issues or general inquiries. And if you could please make sure your microphone is on mute to avoid noise disruption. The ability of puppyish golden Labradors to add something to a webinar on decarbonising transport is fairly limited. So if we could please go to mute, that would be really great. Let us kick off. This is an important issue for us to deal with today, because there is a whole set of, in my view, quite important advantages in using biomethane as a transport fuel for heavy goods vehicles, for passenger service vehicles, which allow us to make some real headway on decarbonising the transport sector. And we've got a very good panel here to address some of these issues. I'd like to start with Wasundhara Doradania, who is our policy analyst at ADBA. And Wasun is going to give us an overview. We'll then move on to Philip Felt, the co-founder and CEO of CNG Fuels, Mark Richmond, the technical director at WRM, and Deborah Delaney, the general manager at BioCapital. So we should be able to cover, hopefully, all the bases for any questions that you may have, and I'll hand over straight to Wasun to give us a first presentation. Wasun.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Let me share the screen again. Okay, 1 second. Can you confirm me that you can see the slide only and not the notes?
Yep, that looks good.
It's perfect. So yeah, thanks, Chris, again for the introduction. So my name is Wasundhara. I'm a policy and market analyst with ADBA, and welcome again to our webinar on decarbonizing the transport sector using biomethane. So in the next 10 minutes, I will give you a brief overview about the potential of biomethane to advance decarbonization efforts of the transport sector, especially heavy goods vehicles. And I will also touch on the opportunity for local authorities to take advantage of this area. Moving on, before getting into all the good details, I want to give you, show you these charts and talk to you a little bit about the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector. Transport is the largest GHG, greenhouse gas emitting sector in the UK. And in 2021, this sector produced 437 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, which contributed to about 26% of the UK's total emissions in that year. It's also the slowest sector to reduce emissions since 1990. And speaking about how much it contributes to air pollution, 32% of the nitrogen oxides emissions and 14% of the particulate matter, PM2.5 emissions, came from the transport sector in 2021. And diving into the sector emissions within the transport, heavy goods vehicles are responsible for 20% of these transport emissions. Now, I did this presentation last year at the Decarbonizing Transport webinar also, using 2020 statistics. And when I'm working on this slide, I realized that all of those numbers have been increased from 2020 to 2021. So it's not going down, and it's an issue. So that shows that we need solutions. We know that the UK needs to decarbonize this sector immediately, but we simply don't have time to wait for alternative technologies to become commercially feasible and commercially available to that scale. And biomethane, it's the best available, ready-to-use technology solution, and it with the capability of decarbonizing, to start decarbonizing the sector immediately. And looking at the statistics, these numbers are from our pamphlet report, Biogas Insight Report on Transport. Looking at the statistics, if we rapidly deploy biomethane, emissions from HGVs could be reduced by 38% by 2030. But if we wait for electricity or hydrogen trucks to be deployed, the emissions would be cut by just 6% over the same period. Now, the good news is that more HGV, like heavy goods vehicle fleets, are transitioning into biomethane fuels as the companies recognize its ability to deliver return in investment and cut carbon emissions. And also, fueling HGVs with biomethane can cut well-to-wheel emissions by 80% per kilometer driven compared to diesel. For context, well-to-wheel emissions are emissions related to fuel production, processing, distribution, and use, compared to diesel trucks. So now, diving into why biomethane can be a practical and immediate solution to decarbonize the sector, the transport sector, which is inarguably one of the hardest to decarbonize sectors. First, continuously growing supply. Anaerobic digestion, or AD plants, they recycle organic waste to generate biomethane and other bioproducts. Currently, the UK has over 720 AD plants that are operational across the country. Of these, 133 plants upgrade biogas to biomethane, so they are biomethane plants, and they produce around 7 terawatt-hours of biomethane per year. And this sector, it continues to grow each year with a growing potential to supply biomethane as a transport fuel, which can fuel over 40% of the HGVs at the sector's full potential. I'll get into that a little bit later. Now, the second one is utilization. There are already over 600 gas-fueled HGVs operating in the UK, and this number, it grows rapidly. And major industry players like Asda, John Lewis, etc., have already transitioned from diesel to gas-fueled trucks. And as for the station distribution, as you can see from the map here, there are 40 fueling stations distributed across the UK, with more in the pipeline. But that's more details about this will be discussed by Philip later in the session. And about the current state of the sector in the UK. Currently, the energy consumption by the HGV sector in the country is around 81 terawatt-hours. And the AD sector generates enough biomethane to fuel only about 8.5% of this sector consumption in the UK. But at full potential, whereas all readily available and unavoidable organic waste are recycled through AD, an estimated 54 to 55 terawatt-hours of biogas can be produced. If all this biogas were to upgraded into biomethane, that's enough to fuel about 40% of all HGVs in the UK. And not only providing a fuel, alternative sustainable fuel for HGVs, there's a big greenhouse gas emission saving aspect as well. Currently, the AD sector contributes to about 5.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas savings across the country, which translates to about 5.2% of total greenhouse gas emissions from the UK's domestic transport sector. And at full potential, the AD sector can save over 23% of these domestic transport-related greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I want to show you in a much simpler way the opportunities that local authorities have, food waste collection has for using biomethane fueled vehicles. in this kind of a sustainable closed loop system. First, food waste can be converted into biomethane via anaerobic digestion. And we know this process breaks down organic matter in an oxygen-free environment to produce biogas, which is then upgraded to biomethane. And this biomethane, you can see in the second part, this biomethane can then be used to fuel waste collection, food waste collection, and any waste collection trucks, replacing traditional diesel fleets in the local authorities. And biomethane is a carbon neutral fuel, and it's derived from waste rather than fossil sources. So there is that sustainability and reduction of emission component as well. Finally, these biomethane-powered refuse trucks, waste collection trucks, can be used by local authorities to collect food waste in their areas. Given that AD is the government's preferred solution to treat food waste, these collected food waste can be brought right back to an AD facility, completing the circular sustainability loop. So the end result is a very integrated system where food waste is able to generate its own fuel for the trucks that collect it in a circular system. And digging more into how this is a good opportunity for local authorities beyond reaching the regulatory requirements. With many local authorities now declaring a climate emergency, there is a pressure to dramatically reduce emissions, Scope 1 emissions from their operations, and reach net zero within the next decade. And for many of the local authorities, a major contributor of their emissions is waste collection fleets. And also this new policy on simpler recycling mandates, it mandates local authorities to collect food waste from households on a weekly basis, which will further add to these emissions if it's not now. This is where a circular solution like AD can become an opportunity, as I also showed in the previous slide, where local authorities can switch their diesel waste collection fleets to biomethane and delivering co-benefits across the sectors. So there are some local authorities that are already doing this. For example, Liverpool Council, they have a fleet of 20 biomethane fueled refuse collection trucks, and that is the UK's largest eco-friendly waste management fleet. And apart from that, the benefits of using these biomethane for trucks is huge compared to traditional diesel trucks. For one, these CNG vehicles fueled by biomethane can reduce nitrous oxide and particulate emissions by up to 90%, dramatically improving the air quality as well. And on the cost and financial side, due to the lower fuel duty of gas, refueling the trucks with biomethane costs comparatively less compared to like-for-like diesel vehicles. And biomethane refuse collection fleets, they provide better working condition for waste collection employees as well, waste collectors as well. They prefer these biomethane trucks according to the reports, stating improved air quality, less noise, and less vibration. And also the low cab entry these trucks has improves their ease of use and safety as well. And the trucks itself are highly reliable and they require minimal downtime, which means cost is less in that aspect as well. And lastly, these trucks are clean air zone compliant. We know now many local authorities already have or looking to introduce clean air zones within the city, charging highest polluting vehicles. By switching to biomethane trucks, authorities can demonstrate thought leadership and showcase the practical and economic feasibility of transitioning away from diesel fuel. Now, before I end, I want to make one last point. AD and anaerobic digestion is a circular solution that can largely help decarbonize the UK's heavy transport sector. But also, in addition to that, can also deliver multiple core benefits like waste management advantages, biofertilizer production, biocarbon dioxide captured for industrial usage, and also generation of renewable electricity. With that, that's all from me. I'm slightly over time, so thank you for everyone, and I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Wasun. I think that's absolutely fine and a good introduction to the issues that we're dealing with. I think probably the best thing to do is we go straight through all the presentations and then save any questions for the end. The next up is Philip Fjeld, and I'm delighted to see Philip has a background, amongst other things, in the Royal Norwegian Coast Guard. So there's a good link there with natural gas. But he's been involved in the natural gas industry now for more than 20 years. So knows an awful lot about this subject and has been involved with CNG fuels. So Philip, why don't you take us away with your presentation?
Thanks, Chris. And Wasundhara, I'm happy if you want to just share the slides, and I'll tell you to move on between slides.
If it's easier, you can share the slides, Philip.
Okay, I'll share the screen then. I hope you can all see this.
Yes, that's perfect, and it's up.
And if I move them up and down, you can see them move as well.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm on the list here as co-founder and CEO of CNG Fuels. You'll see up in the left-hand corner here, top left-hand corner that says refuels. We are essentially the same, but we did implement a new topco, a new holding company structure last year, which means that CNG Fuels develops, owns and operates all of the refueling infrastructure here in the UK, which of course is relevant for the topic today. But just to make it consistent, when we make slides on our end now, it's branded as refuels, but the as I say, the entity here in the UK that develops this infrastructure and indeed refuels, as an example, these 20+ refuse trucks in Liverpool, they run through a CNG Fuels station in Knowsley, Liverpool. Oops, daisy, going a bit too fast here. So what is it we do? We've got an ambition to decarbonize Europe's truck fleet. That doesn't mean that we are 100% focused on biomethane, but a very big but there. We are market focused and want to deliver to our customers what the customers demand and what is also technically and economically feasible. And as of today, what our customers are demanding is basically biomethane. That's it. We will be involved in hydrogen trials and fast charging electric vehicles or electric HGVs in the next couple of years. But the bread and butter for this company for probably decades to come is going to be about putting biomethane into an increasingly large fleet of increasingly large number of biomethane trucks going. Just one quick point to clarify here. I think Wasundhara mentioned 600 trucks in the UK today that use biomethane. I can't really blame you for quoting that figure because the industry is moving at pace, but that figure is now much larger. So we today, as of today, have more than 1,700 trucks going through our station network, running 100% on biomethane. We know our customers have close to about 1,000 trucks on order. And of course, and then there are a couple of other providers as well. So in total today, there are north of 2,000 trucks, HGVs, and these are predominantly on the heavy end of the HGV spectrum. So typically everything from 18, but particularly 26 tons upwards. And we don't see that growth rate slowing down. On the contrary, we see that picking up even more pace going forward. We've got 13 stations in operation today, 2 in construction, and a plan to roll out a lot more. And over the last 9 months, we have saved more than 120,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions across our station network. So what does a typical station look like? This is the one we've got up in County Durham, Newton Aycliffe. this is a typical station that we develop. Public access, meaning anyone who signs up to become a customer can use it. We don't sell any any hot dogs or newspapers on site. These are unmanned facilities, very, very efficient dispensing facilities for vast quantities of energy. Just to put into perspective, one of these facilities can, at full utilization, dispense about 350 gigawatt hours of biomethane per annum. You know, a typical mid-sized AD plant is about 40 to 50 gigawatt hours, maybe. So you can soon see that, you know, we can dispense somewhere in the range of, you know, 8 to 9 biomethane plant equivalents. This can fill up to 14 trucks simultaneously, 80 trucks per hour. It's unmanned. We remotely monitor it, and so on and so forth. So, as I say, very efficient ways of dispensing huge amounts of renewable energy, and open to lots and lots of fleets in the area. So once again, these are not built specifically for single customer usage. These are for all of our local fleets in the area, and of course for customers who have passing traffic. Why are we focused on HGVs? Very simply, because if we can deal with HGVs, then we make an outsized contribution to greenhouse gas emission reduction. About 1% of vehicles on the road in the UK today are classed as HGVs, but they make up, or they emit close to 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see there that by dealing with a very small section of the number of vehicles on the road, we can clean up almost 20% of GHG emissions. Now, I know there's a lot of focus on, particularly from the government, on electrifying, particularly passenger vehicles. They've also got ambitions within, you know, electrifying trucks and so on and so forth. The reality, however, is that particularly for the heavy end of the HGV spectrum, and I say the heavy end because, of course, an HGV can be anything from 3.5 tons upwards. So therefore, what you typically see is that in the lighter end of the HGV spectrum, it is, of course, easier to electrify. But once you get into the heavier end, you have much more demanding duty cycles. They're much more payload sensitive. Batteries become an issue, and so on and so forth. So you know, that's why our customer base today have one focus, and pretty much one focus only, and that is to decarbonize near term and medium term, and that means that electrification and hydrogen for them today is not an option. Also mentioned, you know, why is biomethane such a good alternative? First of all, it's here and now. Secondly, it is a very economical alternative, which we'll see in a bit. But more importantly, it is the only biofuel that can go greenhouse gas emission negative, which is a huge selling point and a huge attraction for our customer base. Because if you run on biomethane, which comes from manure, bio-CNG from manure, you go heavily negative. And that, of course, is a great benefit. Now, you can also go negative, and we would expect to see that in the future for other feedstocks as CO2 capture from biomethane facilities becomes even more prevalent. So then you can take, you know, food waste and other types of feedstocks that today are not seen as GHG negative, but you can then also manage to push that into negative territory. And that's something as well that we would expect to see as a trend going forward. And of course, you know, if you run on green electricity, the best you can ever become, well, not really, because you've got embedded emissions in your vehicle, but the best you could ever hope to become is to become GHG neutral. So how has biomethane been doing as a fuel over the last 4, 5, 6 years? So we founded CNG Fuels back in 2014. You know, here we are 10 years on. Yes, we've got a slightly different name, but as I say, CNG Fuels as a station developer and as the UK brand remains and will continue to remain going forward. So if we look at, you know, biomethane, what we've done essentially is, you could say we've built an industry here in the UK. When we started out, there were essentially 0 trucks running on 100% biomethane. Today, we've got 1,700 going through our station network and close to another 1,000 on order. And, the order book will just continue to increase going forward. Biomethane, however, has not necessarily had an easy ride. This is just a graph to show you some of the challenges that have been sort of thrown in our way. Brexit, and you might say, well, how was Brexit an issue? Well, there was a lot of uncertainty within the haulage sector because of Brexit, how that would affect cross-border trade. It affected the ability to get trucks into the country and so on and so forth. So that slowed down adoption. But even though it slowed down adoption, we continued to grow. Then as we got into COVID, 2020, we actually started to see proper liftoff in the industry at that point in time. So despite COVID happening, despite the lead time for vehicles being really pushed out in time to more than a year, we continued to grow. Then, of course, we had maybe the biggest shock for us, which is the energy crisis. Why do I say that? Because the way we price the fuel to our customers, it is linked to the cost of fossil gas. As all of you will have known and certainly read about, the gas prices shot up in 2021, 22, started gradually to come down last year in 23. But even through that period, our customers didn't park up their trucks. On the contrary, they continued to utilize them. And more importantly, order books continue to grow even larger. And then, of course, we're now, or maybe coming out of the worst of it, but we're still in a high inflationary period where we may or may not be in a recession, which again affects the haulage sector quite badly. Despite all of this, last year we had a growth rate of 65%, and we expect to see the same going forward. On the right-hand side here, though, is an important one. What our customer base says is that everyone wants to go green and want to go as green as quickly as possible. But no one can afford to lose vast sums of money compared to running diesel baseline vehicles and go green. So therefore, they're looking for something that is at least cost neutral or cost parity with diesel, but ideally maybe even saves them some money to compensate for the perceived risk of running a different type of vehicle than a diesel vehicle. As of today, or sorry, these are February numbers, but as of February, our customers saved about 40% on a pence per mile basis compared to running a diesel truck. So that's a huge incentive for switching from one vehicle technology to another. So just in summary, is biomethane or bio-CNG as we label it, is that just a short-term trend? Is it a blip? Is it flash in the pan? No, we are now getting into the age of true mass adoption amongst our customer base. In fact, if we had more stations built, which building infrastructure in this country is not easy, but if we had more stations built, we would have more customers adopting, meaning we wouldn't have 1,700 trucks, as you see in the middle here, running through our network. We'd have 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 trucks going through our network, and the confirmed order book would be much more than the 950 we've got today. And then finally, the total market size here, and this is our estimate. This is estimate from consultancy, and as such, we're only at the really start of mass adoption here. What is it we need more? Stations. We're not short of biomethane. We're not short of customer interest, and we're not short of truck capacity or truck production capacity from the manufacturers. It is purely down to stations. As I said, developing infrastructure in this country takes an awful long time. I mean, we've got one station location that we've been developing for 8 years and we're still not building. Now, that's an extreme example, but it just shows how long time it can take to try to get stations up and running. We are bending over backwards to get more built. We've got 5 projects ready to go where we're looking to start building very soon in the next couple of months, and then we'll continue to churn out more stations after that. But this is a trend that will only reinforce going forward. Biomethane going into trucks is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. On the contrary, it's just going to become more and more mainstream. Thank you, and I will stop sharing and hand the screen back.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think it was very interesting. And I thought that your points about the scale of introduction and the speed of introduction it's pretty dramatic, although you've obviously still got a long way to go. Can I just ask one point before we get on? And I know I said we should leave it towards the end, but just as a clarification, you said 40% fuel savings. Is that just in the running costs, or is that, you said pence per mile, is that including the capital costs if you lease?
Sorry, no, I should have clarified that. So that is not a TCO. That is the pence per mile fuel cost of running a vehicle. So if you run a diesel vehicle and you run that vehicle 1 mile, then it costs you 40% less in fuel cost to run a mile with a CNG truck. A CNG truck is more expensive to buy, for sure, depending on the make and model and what kind of spec you throw onto it. It's about 20 to 25 grand more. But typically we see that pay back in 1 to 2 years, and fleets keep their vehicles, depending on whether this is the private haulage sector or refuse sector, will keep a vehicle conservatively for 5 years, maybe more. So there are very strong total cost of ownership numbers in there as well, but the 40% was purely on the fuel. Right.
Do you have the sort of rough total cost of ownership figure that you would be prepared to share with us?
Sure. A typical, once again, this is from the haulage sector. So this is the long haul articulated haulage sector, private sector. What we typically see there over a 5-year period, the total cost of ownership is about 70 grand less when you take into account. So that is for a vehicle that typically does 100,000 miles per annum each. Compare that with a diesel vehicle, given the fuel cost savings I just showed you there. If you then throw the 20 to 25 grand on top initially, your total calculation, you come out about 70 grand in favor of CNG over a 5-year period.
And the sort of total outlay, if it was diesel, would be how much? So 70 grand is what sort of percentage saving?
So you would lay out a CNG vehicle, an Arctic. Once again, I'm running off Arctics here because we haven't got that many data points on refuse vehicles. Although I would like to say we are now in, the pendulum has come across a bit where we're now having more and more discussions with refuse vehicles. But a typical, articulated 4x2 CNG truck will cost you 120 grand maybe. So 70 grand saving on that, and a diesel vehicle would be 100, right? But your total savings here are 70,000 pounds. So it's a huge difference compared to the overall capex cost of the vehicle.
Well, that's very impressive. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's great. Let's move on to the next presentation, please. Mark Richmond from WRM. Mark is a technical director and a chartered waste manager, and has got 20 years of experience in waste management. So a very good person to talk to us about the potential local authority use of biomethane in fueling trucks. Mark.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Sandra, can I just check the next slide, please? Because as you uploaded those, yeah, we're on the right ones. Great. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to check that we've got the correct version in there after a last-minute change. So yes, thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Mark Richmond from WRM, as Chris has introduced. I work in the area of local authority waste management across a range of materials, and including food waste and organics, which is relevant to the discussion today. And in those consultancy services, I deliver a lot of feasibility and business case work for local authorities. I also work on waste service and infrastructure procurements. And as part of that, also support officers in their governance and approvals processes in getting schemes through the council mechanisms. And I'm going to draw on that today, those experiences, to talk around the opportunities, challenges and barriers that we have in the refuse collection sector. So yeah, Sandra has given a really good overview in her slides of the opportunity, the associated benefits, and also the example of Liverpool City Council as an adopter I'm going to give a bit more context around the wider opportunity rather than focusing on the specific mechanics of how that happens. And I know that Deborah will be following on with some specific examples from her plant. So the real driver here and the real opportunity is around the Environment Act, which passed in 2001, and this mandated all local authorities in England, as Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland already have mandatory collections in place, but all local authorities to provide a separate and weekly collection of food waste. There was an announcement in the autumn of last year, which was branded Simpler Recycling, and that has now confirmed that the policies within the Environment Act will come into force in March 2026. So just to be clear, the Environment Act has set out the policy and the legislation for food waste collections nationwide. That hasn't yet actually come into force, and Simpler Recycling has now confirmed that for March 2026. So that creates a lot of opportunity, both in terms of feedstock into anaerobic digestion and feedstock for producing these fuels, but also opportunities for local authority fleets to adopt CNG fuels and biomethane fuels. So firstly, on this slide, let's have a look at some of the opportunities and the investment opportunities. So as I've just said, the additional waste services that are going to be introduced by March 2026 provide a really significant opportunity. This is probably the single largest waste and recycling policy since the early 2000s, when we had a focus on biodegradable municipal waste from landfill and the landfill directive. So a real expansion and proliferation of services. My consultancy has reviewed the market, and we see 159 new food waste collection services to be introduced across England. So that's 159 waste collection authorities that are going to have to roll this service out, and that's going to require them to procure a large fleet. Some work that we've done for Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and 9 of the collection authorities within Greater Manchester identified the 104 new waste collection vehicles, refuse collection vehicles across those 9 authorities alone. So there's an opportunity there for those to go straight to biomethane rather than being rolled out and commissioned by March 26 on diesel and then converted at a later stage. Opportunity to just go straight to biomethane, and also to start that service with a closed loop, as we saw in the earlier presentation, with the food waste that's being collected by that service going to the AD facility and the gas coming back into to fuel the fleet. It's a really important part of messaging as well. So there's obviously the transport side and the reasons for moving to fuel in biomethane fuel, the carbon benefits, the air quality benefits, but local authority officers have also got to encourage participation in these services and being able to show, having a very visible very visible symbol of where the waste has gone and how that waste has been used, coming down the street every week to collect the food waste, is a really powerful message to encourage recycling of food waste. So we've got good opportunity there, lots of vehicles required. There's about another 160 or so authorities who are currently collecting food waste. There's then all of the other waste service fleets, so the residual waste, the dry recycling, potential street scene services as well, whole wider fleet within the frontline waste and recycling department that can be transitioned to biomethane. typically it's a 7-year fleet replacement cycle for refuse collection vehicles. So even for those that are not going to be procuring a new service, that ongoing cycle across those 160 authorities and those wider fleets is providing a real continual opportunity to make this transition from diesel across to biomethane. The next point I've got here is that many RCV specifications are now comparable between gas and diesel. The first time we looked at this at WRM was in 2013, and it was a consortium up in Cleveland of Middlesbrough, Redcar, Stockton, and Hartlepool. And one of the issues that was examined there was the torque requirement for the power takeoff and the compaction plate, which you can see on this image is towards the back of the vehicle, which compacts the material, the collected waste into the vehicle. We've had another 10 years of vehicle development, and I understand that a lot of those early challenges around some of the fleet have now been addressed, and that service managers operating these vehicles are finding very comparable performance between the biomethane and the diesel. As the fleets expand, we are finding in our work that there is a significant program of depot expansion or alteration, and that may also offer the opportunity to develop fueling infrastructure. One of my customers, which is one of the Greater Manchester customers, they have to reverse the final vehicle into the yard and then shut the gates on the vehicle. Depot space is that tight. So they're looking now for new sites where they can expand depot facilities, and looking at gas grid connection, looking at the opportunities to design that depot so that it can also be a refueling, biomethane refueling station for the frontline fleet. Is a real opportunity, and something that can further support and aid the overall opportunity. And that follows on to the next point, which co-location with the anaerobic digestion plant is not essential. I often see examples, particularly from Sweden, places like Jönköping and Uppsala, where fleet are being refueled adjacent to the anaerobic digestion plant. That's not a necessity. We have contractual and commercial sleeving mechanisms that enable green gas to be put into the grid by a supplier and taken out. I've no doubt that the examples Philip's just shown us there, the image of the filling station is operating on such a basis. So this opportunity, to be clear, is not tied to having the vehicle fleet based at the anaerobic digestion plant where the waste is being treated. And just following on from that, grid gas can provide a stepping stone to biomethane. So some work previously with Leeds City Council. About 8 years ago, they took on 3 CNG vehicles into their fleet. This was a project that was undertaken with Northern Gas Grid Networks, and initially those vehicles were running off grid gas. But once that structure is in place, everything's in place then for that to move over to biomethane supplied through that sleeving mechanism. So lots of opportunities there, and I think there's a clear precedent as well from authorities that have made this happen. Sandra mentioned Liverpool earlier on, mentioned Leeds City Council, and I'm also aware North Warwickshire are also running a gas fleet for their refuse services. So that's the positive side. If we turn the coin over now and look at some of the challenges and barriers, particularly in the logistics for local authorities. we're in a post-policy uncertainty landscape, and there's been a lack of clear direction since the Resources and Waste Strategy and the Environment Act came out. So for a local authority officer that's in this kind of post-policy uncertainty landscape, there's a lot to do and a lot to think about. It's the reforms in the Environment Act are not confined to organics. There is extended producer responsibility for dry packaging materials. There is deposit return schemes, again, for dry recycling materials. And raft of other changes. We've got emissions trading schemes coming in on residual waste, which is sent to incineration. So there's a lot of sizable and significant change competing for local authority officer attention. Beyond that, they've got to get these new services designed and procured. And there's a risk here that in addressing some of those really core topics to a waste manager's role, that diesel fleet option is just the default as these new services are procured. Some of those other things that I've just mentioned there are really pressing legislative changes, whereas the biomethane option for the new fleet, it is an option. It's a very good option. It's an option that has environmental and, as Philip was saying, good commercial benefits as well. But my fear here and a challenge is that we may miss the opportunity as it's not a requirement. Vehicle lead times, availability and contingency. Many authorities are being quoted 11 months lead time for new vehicles. There are examples of local authorities booking build slots with manufacturers just to secure a vehicle on time. They've not actually given a specification for that. They've just booked the chassis slot without specifying what the vehicle is going to be. And again, I think this is another area where there's potential to squeeze out the option of biomethane if a lot of those if a lot of those forward slots are being placed onto diesel production lines. There's then a few financial points here, which I'll just run through. The first really is around funding shortfall. I suppose this could be both a challenge and also an opportunity for biomethane. District Council Network recently reported that 2/3 of local authorities expect there to be a shortfall in funding in rolling out these new services. So across those 159 that are still to roll out a food waste collection, the average shortfall was found to be around £210,000. So, a challenge there in terms of making this happen. One, again, that is likely to distract and kind of grab the attention of waste management officers. But equally, with that kind of shortfall being identified, got to look at this optimistically and think about some of the commercial benefits of running gas over diesel, as Philip outlined. Another financial challenge is the rise of the Section 114 notice, which we're all becoming more aware of over the last couple of years. So this is a situation where a local authority it gets into a situation where there's a prohibition on non-essential spending. To date, we've got 14 councils that are currently operating under Section 114 notices, and in those circumstances, funding is restricted to essential service only. And again, another clear opportunity to see spend on biomethane vehicles squeezed out and perhaps the opportunity missed. So yeah, seen as an optional component in delivering that new legislative requirement. Final financial point here is around incentive, stability versus value. So a lot of investors in AD are institutional investors that are investing pension fund money and managing those funds. And from some of our due diligence work, we quite often see that stability of return and certainty of a incentive scheme is preferred over potentially higher values that may be variable. So yeah, that could see in some cases, not all, green gas support scheme possibly win out over the RTFC mechanism. And then finally, yeah, competition from the heating energy sector. Earlier in the introduction, we heard that transport is one of the areas where we're quite challenged in meeting targets for decarbonisation. Heating is also lagging behind. So yeah, there's perhaps a challenge there between the two targets. And you know, in terms of the demand for biomethane overall, whether that's going into heating or transport applications, very high demand for that. So prospect of competition from outside the transport sector. So yeah, just a few discussion points noted down there. A few thoughts on the opportunities and challenges, particularly in this waste collection area. And I'll close there and hand back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's a very useful discussion. Can I just a couple of tiny things to clarify before we move on to Deborah? When you're talking about those depots, obviously not having to be co-located with AD plants and therefore being able to sleeve gas through the gas grid, does that mean the depot basically has to be connected to the gas grid? Not a big challenge generally, but
absolutely, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And just the other point that I was going to ask you on the financial squeeze there, and particularly obviously those authorities that are in the unfortunate position of being hit by the Section 114 notices, does that mean basically they're just running the old fleet until they can free up the resources to do something?
Yeah. So the 114 puts a limit on any non-essential spend. I haven't worked with any of those authorities who are under a 114 and whose fleet has come to its end of life cycle. So you know, said typically 7 year. So whether or not the replacement bang on 7 years would be seen as an essential spend or not under Section 114 is a question I can't answer.
Yeah. So what realistically, if you're running an old fleet, there must be a sort of crossover point at which the maintenance and repair costs simply make it a less good option than going for new vehicles. Is that generally something after the 7th year, 8th year, 9th year?
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
why that 7-year cycle is there?
It is, yes, Chris, and you know that's increased over recent times as well. You know, perhaps maintenance regimes, and also the fact that these vehicles are not running onto landfill anymore. That used to be a big issue. So yeah, I'd say the 7 years is a reflection of that point.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Let us move to our final presentation from Deborah Delaney, who's the general manager at BioCapital. And Deborah, I think you're going to talk about the Warren's Group case study in particular to get some specifics in here.
Yeah.
I think you joined BioCapital in 2022, but has actually had a long period working in renewables and waste for over 20 years before that as a consultant with management roles in commercials, transport and project management as well. So again, a very good person to bring us some expertise on this particular subject. Deborah, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to join this panel. First of all, BioCapital, as we've been talking about, is 5 years old now and has just had their anniversary. They're made up of a couple of funds, Helios and Equitix, and over a period of time, they've acquired a number of sites. Could we go to the next slide, please, Wassam? Thank you. So as you can see there, we've got 10 different offerings at the moment. So since probably 2019 onwards, we've acquired a number of assets. Mainly, you can see that we've got a covering across the Scotland area. We've got 3 sites up there. We've got a site over in Ireland that provides a couple of services. And then the one in near Darlington, which is the Newton Aycliffe site, which has both the transport and the biogas site. And then we've got a couple over in the Norfolk area and one down in Dagenham. Those are a mixture of food waste and agricultural waste, and the only one that has transport co-linked with it at the moment is Emerald Biogas, although we are making that a nationwide service at the moment. We go to the next slide, please. So Biocapital or Warren's Group started collecting way back when we bought this business, and 5,000 tonne mark. We're now sitting around 120, with 100,000 of that being feedstock or food waste. Basically, the fleet strategy is that we should be entirely CNG driven by the start of 2025. And that's something we've been working really hard to do. And we're looking to expand our business further this year because we're actually constructing at the moment another waste reception on that site at Emerald, which is in Newton Aycliffe. Next slide, please. When we talk about circular economy, I don't think you can get much more circular economy than an AD plant that is using what it brings in and putting it back to the land, or using every single product that comes out of it. We bring in the food waste, we class that as feedstock. It's really useful to us, and out of that, our sites have CHPs or gas to grid. The way that that works is that we create the renewable electricity from the gas that is generated off that food, and we can use that for parasitic use on site or to feed back into the grid. We also do the same with gas on particular sites where we're close to the gas grid. And we then use the biomethane for transport fuel once we've cleaned it. We're looking at the moment at CO2, and that is something that we're about to put in at a number of our sites. And we're also ensuring that everything that we produce out of every single site is fed back into a useful product. The waste is coming in from local areas to our sites, and the end result is a biofertilizer once it has been through the whole process, which we then put back out to, which means in entirety, this is a completely closed loop. Okay. We've been working with local authorities for quite a while now on our drive to net zero. There's a whole host of issues that those local authorities have to think about. There are bin sizes, caddies, and their availability. I think I heard an anecdotal comment the other day that there's about an 8 million facility to manufacture bins, but there's actually a requirement of 11 million at this point in time. So those are the kind of things that the local authorities will have to be thinking about, whether to put orders in now or to wait. They're also looking.
Deborah, I think you've frozen.
They have their own collection.
Sorry, I think you froze just briefly there, Deborah. Could you just spool back by 30 seconds?
Okay, where did you hear to, Chris?
That's a difficult question. Where did you get to? It's literally the last 30 seconds. You just froze.
Okay. Am I back now? I take it?
Yeah, you are.
Collection vehicles that local authorities may have are either in-house, or they may use third party. If they have their own fleets, they seriously are looking at the moment at what should we be using, CNG, electric, diesel, how do we move forward? And whether they should be source separated or split bodies, etc. The only issue with the fleets are that a good proportion of them are on quite long lead times at the moment. So these are decisions now, and very often they don't have that information to allow them to make those decisions at the moment. If they don't have an AD close to them, and of course not everybody is really fortunate, every local authority that they've got an AD placed right in the middle of their local authority, then they could have transfer station requirements in order to get it to an AD if that's what they choose to do with it. For us, you can see that we've got filling station on site, and refueling with CNG is an option for those RCVs that come into us from the local authorities. If they chose to go CNG, they could, of course, drop off the feedstock, drop off the waste, go around the back, fill, and continue on. So that's a really good option for them. However, at the moment, we've not got very many filling stations, and Philip's already told you about how they are putting together this great the country at the moment. What this means is that they can look at a neutral carbon footprint for their fleets. When comparing the sustainability of their own fleet on CNG to a third-party fleet that may well not be on CNG or electric, there is no comparison. But they're having to look at the moment at contingency plans in terms of if we don't get these vehicles on time, if we don't get these caddies on time or these bins on time, and that is very difficult in this market. The one thing that they can get from us is a sustainability and data management and data provision, which I'll go on to a little bit later. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So alongside the local authorities, we also collect from larger companies. We do work for national and local brokers, and we also move feedstock between our sites should it be required. It's important for local authorities to know, and other clients, that they've got contingency in our sites, and that's certainly what they've got when you've got 10 sites around the country. If we can move that on CNG, all the better. One of the things we don't want to be doing is moving this waste across country on diesel. Our own fleet at the moment that allows us to do that. We've got a really strong customer service record because this was a family business that we acquired, and we've ensured that we've stuck with that customer service that we got originally. And we have an excellent customer portal and a traffic management system that allows us to track the vehicles, to email automatically to customers should there be any issues prior to and collecting and following the collections, and allows them to have real-time information on whether their collections have happened or whether there is an issue en route to them. Where we have issues of contamination, for example, we can provide photographic evidence from the PDAs that the drivers carry around with them, and then we follow that up with regular contract management meetings with our extensive national commercial team. At Emerald in particular, we've got ISCC accreditation, which means that for every bit of waste going in there and the gas that goes through, you've got full supply chain visibility. When we are looking at the manufacturing commercial waste that we deal with, there are a number of options for us at the moment. This is the larger, heavy end of the HGVs. So we've got tankers and hook loaders that exchange skips and compactors. By the end of 2025, that will all be CNG, including the Arctics, to ensure we've got a complete closed loop. At the moment, we move solid food and effluent, bin waste, and we take that in, we will sample it, and then proceed to a supply agreement or contract based on that sampling that we've had back. The transport arm of the group is being increased at the moment and rolled out to all sites, with movements between generally where we can at the weekend or moving it during the week where needed. But what it's meant for us is that it's budgetable and it's transparent. So at the moment we have, we're quite a small fleet, as you can imagine, for an AD business, but it's growing all the time. We have 4 RCVs, which are CNG, and from Iveco, we have 2 6x2 Arctics, which are an Iveco conversion, that do tipper and tanker work, and a further 2 are due to be delivered in March and April. We have a hook loader, which is a Scania CNG, and we have a hook loader, which is due to be delivered in July from Scania again. We work with a company called Northeast Truck and Van in the locale that does all of our provision of R&M for us. And that's been a really good learning curve, I have to say. When we started in 2018 with the RCVs, as you can imagine, it was quite new. It was quite a new market. It meant that we were dealing with things that perhaps we hadn't seen before. There was a lot of engine warning management lights, etc. And you're going to get that kind of thing with a new CNG, but they've developed over time and they provide a really good service now, and we've grown and learned with their fitters at the same time. Can we go down a slide, please? That's it. Great, thank you. So after the initial investment on the truck, and as Philip and Mark have said already, it is more for a CNG vehicle. It's not considerably more, and when you look at the payback, you are looking between 1 to 1.5 years at the moment from our calculations. But at the moment, on the runs that we're doing, on significant runs, because we are moving from Newton Aycliffe, sometimes right up to Scotland, filling at one of Philip's sites when we go up there to Motherwell, and obviously starting off with a full truck from our site where we've filled already, we're seeing around about a 25 to 35% saving against diesel running costs on fuel only. And that depends on whether the load is, right up to maximum on those HGVs and the RCVs, and whether or not it's a particularly arduous run. If I'm being honest, a long run, motorway based all the way up to Scotland will take slightly more than running around locally, which we also do on our HGVs and our RCVs. But as I say, manufacturers have come a long way in ensuring the product is maintained correctly and it's efficient. So I think what the slides I'd conclude with are that, first of all, this is local energy security. We're making sure that anaerobic digestion and biomethane production is creating a locally sustainable fuel source, and it diesel. We've all seen the fluctuating prices of diesel, and we've been able to eradicate that where we're using the CNGs. We're very conservative with our budgeting over the CNG prices, and we try to keep that as close to what is happening in the market as possible. The local CNG installations that we've seen and the network that is developing with Philip and his team is allowing us to transport that feedstock nationally, should it be required, with little impact on sustainability. And the fillings pumps on site at the AD facilities that we build ourselves and have on our own sites on the ADs are relatively inexpensive to put in. and it allows us, again, as I say, more accurate budgeting. Some of the challenges, let's get to the downsides of this. Obviously, the higher upfront costs that we've talked about. One thing is the lead times and the parts availability. Very often, if you're dealing with some of the companies we are, those parts are coming from Italy or other countries, and we find that there's extended lead time. But as we've worked through, what we've been able to do is come up with a critical spares list that enables us then to ensure that those people have got those parts in that we know will be, an ongoing requirement, and to keep them nearby and ready to go to fit. Availability and efficiency are comparative on the HGVs, on the 44 tonners, but on the RCVs, I would say they still lag slightly behind the diesel, just in terms of their availability for being used. And very often you will still get things like warning management lights. That is purely down to some of these kit being conversions, etc. But they're quickly resolved. The people, the installers and the mechanics and the fitters that we deal with are very well versed in this and can very often resolve that over the phone. The infrastructure, we would like Philip to open up all of his sites with immediate effect, so that we can get from our location to, for instance, the sites in Scotland, filling in the site that I think he's got ones planned for Carlisle. That would be great. And we can only see that improving as time goes on. So in much the same way as Philip, we're driving towards that. We know that will come. But one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, and local authorities would see this as well, I believe, is driver perception. For drivers that have dealt with diesel HGVs for a lifetime, it very often is quite difficult to bring them round to the idea that CNG is good. They hear stories about, from 4 or 5 years ago, where the torque isn't as good and the range isn't good. And you do get range anxiety. And we just have to work through very slowly showing those drivers that that isn't the case, that we are getting good ranges on these vehicles. There is no issue with that, and that we are getting, we're getting good availability and efficiency, and that the torque is not an issue. Very often, most of our drivers will turn around and say to us after a short period of time that they want to drive the CNGs. So I think the challenges thus far have been outweighed by the benefits much more readily, and are recognised by all of our clients. So with that, I'll hand back over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Deborah. That was very useful. Can I just ask you, on drivers, I mean, given that we're talking about quite substantial savings compared with the diesel fleet, I would have thought a small transitional bonus for the drivers to reflect the training involved would get them on side pretty rapidly, wouldn't it?
It does get them on side. Nothing speaks louder than money. But at the end of the day, it's very similar to, the drive over from diesel to electric for cars. There is anxiety around the range availability, and there is anxiety over are they going to make it to that station, that Philip's opened up.
Typically, what are the ranges that we are talking about if you were to compare a diesel?
If we're talking about the HGVs, and that primarily is the one that's going to cause a range issue. They are 250 full load up to Scotland, which is pretty good.
So, sorry, I think you froze again. So they're 350 miles.
We're meant to get 290, and we're getting about the 250 mark on a really hard run up to Scotland at the moment. So
compare
And
the-
that, it's far lower than a diesel. I mean, we would end up at the moment with that, we will get easily to Philip's site in Motherwell and over to one of our sites, and then we would need a quick top up on the way back down. But yeah,
is this relevant realistically to the local authority fleet issue? Because
the local
locally.
Yeah, the local authority won't have an issue. We have 4 RCVs that run around all locally to us, probably within a sort of a 100-mile radius, I'd say. There's no issue whatsoever. They go out for the day, they're out all day, and they come back in, they fill at the end of the night. So on a few streets, you know, that the local authorities would have to do, there'll be no issue on CNG.
Okay. And can I just ask, I don't know who the best person is to answer this, whether it's you or Philip, but the issue of potentially hitting constraints, or maybe Mark, hitting constraints in terms of manufacturers producing the vehicles. You mentioned that there have been conversions already. Is that not a potential option for the local authority sector as well?
Well, I'll let Mark and Philip talk about that also, but from my point of view, the conversion I'm talking about is a 6x2 on the Arctic, which is not readily available. You have to convert what is already available in, you know, an Arctic.
Right.
Which creates a number of issues because you're trying to cram this into, you know, into what's the space that's available.
So that's not relevant. That's not relevant to the local authorities either, because they're obviously not going to be in an Arctic situation.
But the local authorities will just be looking at the RCVs with a, you know, MacPack body or whatever it is they decide on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so, can I just ask Philip and Martin, looking at those smaller ones, if there is a problem with the manufacturers that are offering CNG trucks with capacity and lead times, is it an option to go for a conversion?
No, not really. You'd want to go for well, my opinion is not really. You'd want to go for a manufacturer built vehicle. I don't think the lead times necessarily are going to be a big issue. They were a larger issue some years ago. And just on those Arctics, the 6x2s that Deborah was referring to, those have been produced in very small numbers. To put into context, 41 of the vehicles that go through our station network today out of 1,700 are 6x2s. Those will both, and they've been available on almost a hand-built basis. Come second half this year, they will be available in factory-built options from 2 manufacturers. So all of those issues that Deborah is referring to, in case there is a local authority or someone else that does need to use 6x2s because they might need to for really heavy work, those will be available on a factory basis, built basis in the next 6 months, and with an increased operational range, which will be in excess of what Deborah already mentioned.
Now, in the past, certainly, I don't know if this affects local authorities so much, but if you're looking at the HGV longer haul market, we've had 2 potential options for gas, haven't we? CNG and LNG. Mm-hmm. Is that still the case?
That's still the case.
Yeah. And does that basically mean that there is the fact that you've got 2 rival standards, which, as I understand it, are incompatible, does that actually increase the range anxiety and the likelihood of you not being near a refueling point that you might need?
I mean, I can only speak for our customer base, and the answer is no. Today, there's pretty much one public access LNG station in the country. There are 13 on CNG. So no, if you go down one path, you will have spoken to fuel suppliers to give yourself comfort on that. And if you go down the other path, the CNG path, you'll have spoken to us to become comfortable with that. So, I mean, just to take one step back, you know, we founded the company 10 years ago. Range anxiety was a thing that was a concern for our customers 5 years ago. Now it's not. It's something we rarely hear. Driver acceptance or drivers being nervous towards CNG, no longer an issue. I'm talking about the articulated truck market now, okay? Not the RCV market, because there are much fewer CNG RCVs out there. But in the articulated market, no, it's business as usual. Getting depots or getting the truck manufacturers to provide sensible maintenance contracts for these vehicles, not an issue anymore. So we've sort of dealt with a lot of these teething issues, if you like, which were early on in the adoption, that are no longer a problem.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think I've got a question here on the webinar from for Philip from ISA. Curious to know if the RTFO scheme in the UK plays a large enough role to incentivize biomethane in the transport sector. What are the main challenges for market participants to use biomethane to generate RTFOs?
Well, yeah.
In the way RTFOs are really, yes. You go away.
A lot of questions in there, and I'm not sure. I'll answer it the way I interpret the question. So the RTFO scheme is a stable and really good policy mechanism that supports the use of bioethanol, biodiesel, biomethane, etc. in road transport. It has no end date. It has a blending obligation that increases every year, and as such has been sort of a bedrock foundation, if you want. My only criticism would probably be it's not ambitious enough. It could have even greater growth in its blending mandate to ensure that there's even greater incentive for bringing more biomethane and other renewable fuels in quicker and faster. And I think the negative and the downside is that the price spread between biodiesel and regular diesel is currently what sets the value of an RTFC. So when you generate RTFCs from biomethane, that is completely delinked to the cost of sourcing that biomethane. The value of the RTFC is generated by the spread between biodiesel and regular diesel, and we haven't got enough time to get into why that is. I'm just pointing it out. So as such, biomethane or RTFCs generated from biomethane going to transport are a price taker of the RTFC price. They are not currently participating in setting the price, which can be challenging if the RTFC prices are driven low, which they currently are.
Okay. Can I ask too if local authorities thinking of coming close to the replacement cycle, beginning to look at this and looking at biomethane, very compelling numbers that you've cited for the potential savings over that 7-year life of the new fleet. And they'll be looking at some pretty horrendous increases in repair and maintenance costs if they keep going. So all of that makes a lot of sense. What about the potential for an electric alternative? How close are the electric guys to providing a real alternative?
So we've looked at kind of like three-way shootout for a couple of authorities between diesel, electric, and biomethane, and I suppose the selection of whether to go biomethane or electric depends on a lot of demographics of the local authority area. So I'm aware of an electric RCV which has been loaned to a number of local authorities to trial. My understanding from the evaluation of those trials is that it's worked quite well in some high density areas. Look, just to give a kind of idea of annual distance and therefore range, and when previous speakers would talk about range anxiety before, some RCVs, refuse collection vehicles, they're doing like 12,000 miles a year, which really isn't a lot. And when you're doing that around a city centre, so I know Cambridge City Council trialled the electric vehicle, some of their more densely populated rounds, that was working well. The challenge comes when an authority has a much lower population density. It's got large rural areas. If you're in North Yorkshire, I know my rounds have quite a lot of severe gradients on them as well to contend with, as well as a very long haul to the tipping point. So again, just speaking from personal experience, I know that when the refuse collection vehicle has been around the few villages I live in, it's got something like a 35-mile haul to the tipping point where it tips the waste, and then it comes back out on a second round. And I think in those instances, Chris, you see for operational reasons the biomethane winning out over the electric. So yeah, electric very much in those urban areas. I don't anticipate them being well suited to central London. Seeing a lot of electric vehicles in street scene, so street cleansing, grounds maintenance, litter collection. Those kind of vehicles seem to be moving over to electric, and of course, a lot of those vehicles have a much lower payload and a much lower gross vehicle weight than the RCVs and the larger vehicles that we've discussed today.
So just to give us a sense of what the sort of crossover point might be. I mean, if you're in an dense urban area, then you might be looking at electric as well as biomethane as an option. If you're looking at a more low density population, more rural areas, suburban areas, you might be looking at biomethane because electric is probably not going to be there. Does the HGV market, Philip, tell us anything about the likely crossover between electric and biomethane, and is it changing? I mean, I know the hydrogen guys it seems to me to be almost permanently in retreat on uses for hydrogen as electric gradually extends its capacity. Is the same thing going to happen to biomethane or not?
So the best way, I mean, whatever I say here, I'm never going to be seen as objective, am I? Given that I'm the CEO and founder of a biomethane for transport fuel company.
All right, we've got a grown-up audience. They can aim off.
I'll try to be as transparent and as hopeful as possible. So, at the end of the day, I'm an entrepreneur. We want to provide our customers with whichever energy vector they want. If they want, some kind of biodiesel, we'd find a way of providing it to them. If they want biomethane, we do that. Of course, that's what we do today. If they want hydrogen, which is why we're doing trials or fast charging, or there was something called pixie dust that by magic could power vehicles, we'd find a way to provide that to our customers. So we are led by what our customers want and not by what we are trying to push down the throat of our customers. So that's number one. Number two is there's a lot of focus on vehicles. Everyone talks about, and I'm talking now about Arctics, everyone says, oh, there's a brand new fantastic Arctic out that can do 300-kilometer range on a summer's day on electric. It's amazing. It can cover 70 to 80% of the usage of an HGV in the UK. Sure, that's true. But first of all, how does it perform when it's not sunny and it's not 20 degrees? So that's number one. On a winter's day when it's blowing a lot and you're using a lot more energy. But then again, it's about how do you get electrons into your vehicles, right? So it's about, if you've got a depot, and I'm just trying to get this over towards local fleets, if you've got a depot with 20, 30 RCVs that come in with a, 200 kilowatt battery, whatever it is, and all of those need charging overnight, you might find that your grid capacity is constrained. That's a huge problem. So I'll give an example. We want to build a large public access CNG station in Swindon. We've been told we want a 1 megawatt connection. It's not big. That's a fairly small connection when it comes to fast charging of anything. We've been told we can get an electrical connection in 2037.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the vehicles, it's about how do you get some form of energy into those vehicles.
It's the grid connection issue.
It's the grid connection.
Renewables guys are talking about, and you've got it this end with a large number of vehicles to refuel in a short period of time.
Absolutely.
And grid connection is a nightmare, isn't it? I mean, I
It
know National Grid even now advertising that it's trying to sort this problem out for the future, but the realistic answer today is that there are massive delays if you want electrical grid connection.
It's an enormous problem, right? And that is a problem that it doesn't matter what National Grid are going to do now on the transmission side of things. It's not just on the transmission side of things. And this is going to take decades, many decades to resolve. So there's this huge gulf between government's ambition of electrifying everything and reality. Yeah. And that's where biomethane comes in as a very good, credible alternative. And we get told, listen, biomethane is a transition fuel. It's a bridge fuel for an all-electric future. And I'm saying, sure, that's fine. I would disagree with that. What I do disagree with is that bridge is 10 years long. No, that bridge, today, I can't see the end of the bridge.
Yeah, it could well be longer than that. And we are, after all, for most local authorities, talking, as we've all discussed, about a replacement cycle of 7 years. So, you know, by all means, look at this again in 7 years' time and make the best decision about what will look appropriate then. But for the moment, it seems to me you have to deal with the real world as it is, and you can make some real benefits in terms of reduction in emissions and, as you've pointed out, reduction in cost. I think we've reached the end of our time, so thank you very much. Just for those who are watching who didn't catch it all or wanted to go back, there is a recording available, and it will be on the ADBA website, and I suspect also on the Decarbonising Transport Week website, but certainly you'll find it on the ADBA website. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you, Wasson from the home team, for their presentations, which I think have elucidated very effectively an interesting area. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.